we've got a super panel here. We're going to be discussing kind of life cycle delivery and also the launch of the net zero public sector building standard through Scape Scotland and their life cycle model, and also how that can drive things forward, but also maybe applicable as well to the rest of the UK, but also broader Europe in some of those standards, and how we can really help push that forward by collaborating and working together. For those who don't know, my name is Richard Betts from Real Asset Media, and we run around, I suppose, 60, 70 of these sessions. And I'll also feed back in on some of the topics that were in a couple of sessions that we had in Amsterdam yesterday, where ESG, carbon neutrality, was a huge part of that, but also the social impact side. But first of all, let me hand over to Chris from Scape. And Chris is just going to give us a kind of brief overview of some of the key topics in terms of life cycle delivery, particularly delivering net zero. Over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Richard. And welcome to everybody who's joining us this morning. To my colleagues on the panel, and to Richard, and to people from all over Europe and Scotland. In today's discussion, we're going to focus on public sector buildings and Scottish public sector buildings in particular. The Scottish Government launched their net zero public building standard at the end of last year, and the details were released in the autumn last year. It was launched March 21, and we're delighted to talk about our delivery route to supporting that standard that we've developed at Scape with our construction partners who are here talking to us as well. This is really important stuff. We'll talk about the context of the climate emergency. We'll talk about what the building standard means in that context, why we have to act on buildings, and how this tool helps. That's the intention for today. The context here is I'm sat just outside Glasgow today, COP26 last year. And within that, the UK and Scotland are committed to legislation and public commitments to avoiding a rise in temperature through global warming of more than 1.5 degrees. We've said we need to take action to prevent the world getting hotter. The amount of temperature rise in the world is already 1.21 degrees. That's the IPCC's current estimation of the extent of global warming to date. So if we're going to act and manage that increase in world temperatures, if we're going to prevent further escalation of the problem we've got, the action needs to be immediate. It's urgent, and it's really crucial that we start to take direct action on the problem now. Otherwise, it will be too late. And the other thing to say on climate action in general terms is because the legacy of everything we do now carries on for years, the sooner we act, the more beneficial the action. So we are internationally procrastinating at the moment, and what we try to do here is deliver a solution that enables you to do things quickly. 20% of emissions in Scotland is projected to come from homes and workplaces. So buildings are a really important contribution to the emissions that lead to global warming, greenhouse gas emissions. An estimated 45% of the UK's emissions are linked to the built environment in one way or another. So that's the construction of roads, the construction of buildings, the use of buildings, and all of the related manufacturing that goes with it. So dealing with our buildings makes a big contribution to our emissions targets, and one that makes an immediate impact. Partly because we reduce the emissions coming from heating in buildings, and partly because we reduce the emissions from electricity demand from the grid. So the indirect emissions that come from power stations. And if we reduce the amount of electricity we need, we're using less gas-fired power station electricity and fewer emissions coming from that source as well. So buildings make a big difference. Standards on buildings are really important, and the Net Zero Public Building Standard in Scotland is the first standard of its type in the UK. It's a leading governmental action in terms of the climate emergency. We all want to do things differently, we all want to act, but the struggle for a lot of people in construction, because it's a technical discipline, is understanding what our success criteria are for a climate emergency. What is a net zero building? When you construct or refurbish it, what does that mean? And what the Scottish Government have done in developing the Net Zero Public Building Standard is make a really clear, unambiguous line in the sand to say a net zero building looks like this, it performs like this. That standard includes considerations for the local economy, place-based considerations. It includes the carbon emissions coming from manufacturing and from construction activity, so the emissions that come from making bricks and concrete and steel. It covers the emissions that come from the use of the building over its life, which is all bound up in energy use intensity in the building, and other whole life carbon emissions from activities like facilities management. The public building standard in Scotland doesn't just deal with raw emissions, but it also deals with other aspects of the environment in the buildings, so targets and objectives around the environmental quality of buildings inside, and other environmental aspects of construction like biodiversity. So this is a standard that is focused very much on greenhouse gas emissions, but it's a wider sustainability standard too. And it defines what we should be doing. It also establishes how we verify that these buildings are to that standard, and that's really important, and it's a key part of our message today. Is if we're going to build net zero buildings and design them, let's make sure they actually are net zero when they're being used. And the standard that's here in Scotland is extraordinary in its leadership, in its demonstration of a commitment to change. The Scottish Government has established a target for net zero as an economy in 2045, which is 5 years earlier than the rest of the UK. It's real national and international leadership. But these standards are coming everywhere. So we might be talking about a standard that's prevalent and in place in Scotland, but such standards will emerge and develop across the world, in the UK beyond Scotland. And those standards may start, as this one is, as a voluntary standard that public sector organisations can opt into. But other standards beyond Scotland will follow. These standards, while advisory now, will be regulatory very soon. If we are to deliver what we said we're going to deliver in law in the UK, this is not a negotiable, it's law. These standards are going to have to be put in place to regulate the construction sector. One example of those standards coming is the consultation that's live now. All the professional bodies in the UK around construction, design, built environment have got together to develop a standard that will be universal. That standard is just starting its development, and I think the timescales envisage a 2-year period where that's sorted out. But so the point here is this is applicable across the rest of the UK and absolutely relevant to the rest of the world. A little bit on SCAPE. So SCAPE is a procurement organisation, and what I'm going to talk to you about today and the solutions we're putting in place have gained its recognition through the Cambridge Centre for Smart Infrastructure, it's Cambridge University, through their initiative, which is part of the Construction Leadership Council scheme for Construct Zero. SCAPE and SCAPE Scotland are champions of the Cambridge Carbon Code, which is a standard and set of commitments which the construction sector is trying to adhere to consistently for change, really. We're hoping that movement will grow. We really encourage everybody to look at that code as a way of making your commitment and planning for the future. At this time, we're the only procurement organisations who have achieved that status, and that reflects a lot of the work that we're talking about today. So our approach to environmental issues in construction, as our Chief Executive said there, tackling carbon intensity is mission critical for us. And we do that through a number of commitments. First is, as an organisation, we're going to be net zero by 2028, which deals with our head office and our electricity consumption and all the things that organisations have to deal with. But in terms of the procurement we do, we provide framework procurement for public sector organisations in Scotland and across the UK. And by changing the game on procurement, by making carbon management, carbon measurement, low carbon construction a requirement, a minimum standard, we're changing the industry through procurement influence. We're also advocating for change, and we're encouraging our clients to set standards in their projects that are truly net zero. We support the REBA 2030 Climate Challenge, which is a set of scientifically established targets, very similar to the net zero public building standard in some of those measures. We advocate to our clients that they should be setting targets for carbon and emissions reduction in their projects. We also commit and invest in innovation, and the Lifecycle contract that we're telling you about today is a really good example of that. So I said SCAPE's a procurement organisation, and we're focusing today on SCAPE Scotland, and the guide that we're launching today, Lifecycle Delivery for Net Zero, has been produced by SCAPE, Morgan Sindall, Keir and Glocker and Harvey working together. I'm delighted that those colleagues could join me today to talk about it. But the standards and the approach and the life cycle construction approach that we're taking is also available in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland through all of our contractors across the UK. So this is an approach that is in the vanguard in Scotland because there's a standard, but this approach is also accessible across the UK to public sector clients. So what's the life cycle contract? I'm going to whistle through this because we want to get into the conversation as a team. The life cycle contract is a procurement approach and a delivery approach. It's a new way for clients to access and use our frameworks, but it's a way of working between the contractor and the client. There's a contractual element to it, but it's also a philosophy of working on projects. It's a tool for new build and refurbishment of buildings. It's an adapted version of what Scape has done for more than 15 years in terms of construction contracts that are easy to access and use, brokering best in industry with aspirational clients. Based on the NEC 4 construction contract here in the UK, but we've tailored it to suit the circumstances. And we're focusing on optimising the performance of buildings once they're built or refurbished. All of the contractors are on the call today, and all of our contractors across the UK in our procurement process had to tender dedicated rates and a tailored method of operation for doing life cycle projects. So this is a competitively tendered and procured approach that we've brought to the availability of public clients. Why we did this is crucial. We know that we need to better evidence and improve the in-use performance of buildings. So there's an awful lot of academic evidence out there that says our design ambition and aspirations are not always being delivered on the ground in buildings. So we wanted a contract that helped prove that buildings were working as they intended to be working. We also wanted to create a route which allows the business case for projects to better link capital investment and operational costs in use. And by having a contract that involves both parts of the financial equation, you can better do the invest to save requirements for net zero. And the reality is net zero buildings are better quality buildings. We do have to commit to making net zero quality buildings a minimum standard. And that does mean a little bit more investment in the fabric of buildings and the efficiency of systems, but you get your money back really quickly. And with energy bills rising, the speed of that return is faster. And the contract allows you to lock in the operational benefits of your investment, whether that's energy reduction, whether that's measured carbon improvements, or whether that's simply the cost of running facilities management in a building. The contract gives you that connection between investment upfront and outcomes. When might you use this? Well, it has a range of potential applications. Really, the focus of today is retrofit decarbonisation projects and delivering accredited and certified net zero projects that adhere to a standard where you have to prove the standard is met. But you might also use this contract if there's an invest and return case on your project, or you want support in delivering a turnkey development, and you want your contractor to help you make the most of the building after it's built. Key benefits. This is a compliant procurement route for the public sector. It will help you back your whole life business cases. We've made it really flexible. We've not prescribed all of the performance measures. There's a lot of flexibility to suit the circumstances of your project. And you can gain 5 years of help after you build from leading sector professionals and businesses. So you're not on your own. You get given a new building, you're not on your own, and there's a whole load of support we can provide, whether that's proving your building's performing or FM or anything else in between. And crucially, you're going to get a minimum of an annual in-use performance review. Think about life cycle contracts as buying a car with a long-term warranty and servicing package. It's a great way of thinking about this. It's a different way to build buildings. And all of Scape's services seek to leverage the earliest supplier involvement in the market. Because Scape does direct award in our frameworks, it means you can bring your contractor in at the earliest possible stage in projects. That's not just a benefit environmentally, but as the market and the inflationary situations are what they are, it can really help you build your project budgets and make your projects deliverable. We also have leading standards on digital and BIM, and you gain that benefit too. A couple of points of philosophy before I talk you through very briefly the process. The lifecycle contract is design and build. We have leading contractors on the call for a reason. And the reason we do that is simply because if you're going to have a contract that's tied into the performance of a building, the contractor has to own that performance. If you want them to own the performance of the building, they've got to take responsibility for designing the building in the first place. So this is a design and build procurement strategy, and that's fundamental. Second key point, and this is really important in the central philosophy of our life cycle approach, our view is a building should be considered defective until it is performing as you're expecting it to in the project. And if you're talking about a net zero building, that's absolutely crucial. If you want to accredit your building to the net zero standards, you need to be able to prove that it's doing what you say it's going to be doing. To make that work contractually, what we've done is we've taken the NEC contract and we've used the defect certification process. So that's signing off the building is working as it's supposed to. And the performance measures that are built into the NEC contract. We've used those tools. And crucially, we've said there are aspects of the building that when you finish building it at the beginning, you can sign off and say that's done, that's right. The fabric of the building, you can certify that quite quickly to say the non-moving parts of the building are working. But what we've said is the moving parts, the machinery in the building, everything that's got a motor in it, anything that's plugged into the grid, all those aspects really should only be signed off and proved to be performing once you've had a period of operation in the building. So this is a construction contract with performance outcomes tied in. And the construction contract isn't done until the use of the building is proven to be right. So here's the process, just in outline, because we'll talk more about this as a team. What's unique to Scape is this free feasibility stage that we offer. And this is really important for Lifecycle because you can have a conversation with a contractor about what you're trying to achieve really early. And you can discuss, is the Lifecycle solution suitable for your building? And if your in-use strategy is to design, develop and use a net zero building, then this solution is going to be suitable for you, I would suggest. We then have a pre-construction stage, which encompasses the outline and detailed design stages that the REBA stages 2 to 4, if you know the UK REBA stages, the design stages. You access that through a Lifecycle service agreement, which is a pre-construction contract. And in that stage, what happens in Lifecycle is the contractor will work with you to identify what you're going to measure, what you're going to judge success by, operational indicators, how much energy you're using, how much does it cost to maintain the building. There could be a number of things you're going to measure, but you need to decide in pre-construction what that is. And you need to tie that to the design. Am I measuring relevant things about my building? And before you reach the end of the pre-construction stage and develop a construction stage contract, you'll set targets with the contractor on those indicators. So you'll decide how much energy you're going to use in the building. You'll set a target for the embodied carbon from the construction process. And that all builds into a scope and performance indicators and defects definitions for your construction stage contract. The delivery stage is through a Lifecycle contract, a Lifecycle agreement. That's an NEC4 engineering construction contract. And you'll notice this contract runs well beyond traditional construction phase. As you put together the delivery program of that construction project, you're going to talk about the activities that are going to happen in use. So you're going to establish in your program for your contract the things that are going to happen in the months and years after the build to measure performance and prove the building's working properly. Construction happens, traditional aftercare happens, the building's handed over to you as an end user, and you deal with the defects in terms of is the fabric performing properly, is the static elements of the building correct? But there's then a period of life cycle works. So these are things the contractor is going to do for you to ensure the building is performing as it should do, measuring performance and optimizing it. And you can have that service and that annual support, interim measurement, all the other things that go with it for up to 5 years, minimum of 18 months, up to 5 years after your construction is complete. And ultimately, sign off that everything is not defective and is working properly to end the contract once it's been proven to perform. And that, in a nutshell, is how the Lifecycle route works. High speed. It's in the guide that we're publishing today. You can read all about it afterwards. Ask us questions. We're talking about adhering to the Net Zero Public Building Standard today, and the guide we're launching brings together our Lifecycle contract delivery route and the Net Zero Public Building Standard. And you'll see here, there's a number of dark blue boxes that layer into the process I've just shown you. For example, at the end of the feasibility stage that Scape offers, at the same stage of a project, the Net Zero Public Building Standard in Scotland requires an application to be submitted by the client and a report to be produced that sets out the ambition for the project. What's fantastic is our process at Scape Scotland ties in with the stages of that Net Zero Public Building Standard almost perfectly. And at each stage of the Scape process, we will support, and our contractual team will support you in delivering the stages of the Net Zero Public Building Standard. And it works perfectly with the lifecycle model, right through to continuous improvement reports for up to 5 years after completion. And that scope of time, that partnership between client and contractor to prove that the building is net zero, is essential to adhere and to deliver on the Net Zero Public Building Standard in Scotland. So you can see that the two processes come together, and that's what this guide is all about for you. So what you're going to find in the guide, hopefully everyone on the call will download it and have a read. What you're going to get in the guide is an overview of the Net Zero Public Building Standard, what it's all about, how it works. There's a link in that to the full technical details of that guide published by the Scottish Futures Trust for the Scottish Government. So you can access all of the requirements of that guide and any changes that happen to it straight from their website without having to refer back in this document. So you get an overview of the standard. You then get stage-by-stage guidance of what each party has to do as they progress the project, from the feasibility stage through pre-construction and into the construction stage, and ultimately the in-use verification stage where you're proving your building is working properly and getting that independent verification that your building is working right. And at the end of the guide, the contacts of our team so that you can get in touch and get started on this if this is something you want to do. That's Lifecycle, that's Net Zero Public Building Standard. I'll hand back to Richard. Let's have a conversation about what this all means.
Great, thanks very much, Chris. Really interesting to get that kind of detailed view. I mean, certainly from my perspective, we launched Impact Magazine, which is an initiative as well, looking at events, but social impact as well as carbon neutrality and the drive, particularly for the built environment. And it's really interesting to see how it's moved relatively rapidly, I think, from it being a discussion about that we should do things to actually some of these concrete things now beginning to come through to really help drive some action. Let's just introduce the panel. Let's maybe start with you, Lisa, if we could. So just a quick introduction of yourself and I suppose your role there at Kier Construction.
So hi, my name is Lisa McDade. I'm the environmental advisor for Kier Construction in Scotland. So we focus on mainly public sector clients, building schools, hospitals and prisons, but we also do major refurbishment works as well. My focus is mainly in the pre-construction phase, as quite a lot of work goes on, as you can see from the guide, in the pre-construction phase on net zero targets, and the practicalities and how to achieve them is all done before you get to site.
Great, perfect, thank you. Peter, over to you.
Yep, thanks, Richard. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. So my name's Peter Barker. I'm the Head of Design Management at McLaughlin and Harvey, who I've worked with for the last 16 years. My career in the construction industry spans 25 years overall. I worked within design consultancy initially, and in more recent years within design management, managing design and pre-construction activities on major construction projects. So McLaughlin and Harvey are our main contractor, and we deliver high quality construction projects across the public and private sector throughout the UK. We've just recently completed 2 projects through the SCAPE framework in Scotland and are currently on site delivering a further 6 live projects through the framework, with a further 3 projects which are currently in pre-construction stage. So part of my role within McLaughlin and Harvey is working with our Net Zero Steering Group to promote innovative ways to help decarbonise construction projects and to align with our own Net Zero 2030 strategy. Sustainable design and construction is at the heart of our business, and it is that has led to my involvement in SCAPE Lifecycle and developing the guidance in the Net Zero Public Sector Building Standard. The SCAPE Lifecycle provides us with a platform for achieving and delivering the government's net zero targets in public sector building, and our guide's been developed to provide an exemplar route for delivering to these targets, enabling our clients and partners to make commitments to sustainability while setting ambitious but achievable objectives in response to the climate emergency, and with a view that our positive leadership will hopefully bring momentum within the construction industry as a whole and beyond. So we are obviously committed and motivated to engage with our clients and partners and help drive the construction industry towards net zero, and I look forward to the question and answer session as it comes on.
Great, thanks very much. Elizabeth, over to you.
Hello everyone, and thanks for joining. I'm Elizabeth Halliday. I'm Head of Responsible Business within Morgan Sindall Construction in Scotland. As a person, I'm an engineer. I have moved from, similar to Peter, moved from the design consultancy over to construction, where I totally love been able to work with our customers and our design teams to really make a difference towards our effect, the built environment's effect on climate change. Morgan Sindall as a business really put sustainable design at the heart of our business. It's led from the top. John Morgan sets us really ambitious targets. He's given us a carbon tax that each of our projects are taxed against, and then that money is then taken into a climate change fund where we then do further projects to reduce our carbon emissions. We've got a forest down in the Blenheim estate where we're planting 270,000 trees, which will be managed over the next 25 years. So there's some quite exciting projects happening. Similar to Scape, we've achieved champion status on the carbon reduction code. So that's something that we quite like to advertise, get people more aware of that, because it is a fabulous system. A responsible business plan is really at the heart of everything we do. So it's based around our 5 total commitments, which are protecting people, developing people, improving the environment, working together with our supply chain, and enhancing communities, which is what we're all here to do. And that's part of my role within the responsible business team, is working with the sustainability aspects of the business and social value, with what's good for people is good for the environment. So thanks very much.
Great,
Richard.
thanks, Elizabeth. And just a reminder, on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll also be able to download the slides. So those are there as a resource for everybody. And I can see we're already getting some questions in. So I'll come to those during the discussion and make sure that we also pick up on your views. So do put those in the Q&A and chat, and I'll make sure we come to those. Lisa, it might be interesting just to pick up on. I mean, it's interesting that there's a big collaboration in general here in terms of industry partners. I suppose you've all worked together on this launch. So why now? And I suppose what did you all want to achieve by working together?
Yeah, so collaboration is really key now. We, as Chris showed on the slide, we've already warmed 1.2 degrees. And our target, if we are to keep it below 1.5, we really have to level emissions by 2025, is what scientists are saying. So we really don't have much time left. So collaboration now is really essential to achieving those goals. And if we can't work on silos, we really have to work together, share our ideas, share our innovation, so that we can all achieve net zero and therefore keep warming below 1.5.
Well, that's interesting. And Peter, from your perspective, and Elizabeth, Lisa, feel free to come in on this. But I suppose when you were looking at this process, what were some of the key challenges, I suppose, that you saw in terms of reaching these net zero targets?
I think the biggest challenges just now is commercial challenges within the industry. Let's be honest. It's clients being able to get the budgets to pay for this out of their operational budgets to bring that into the capex phase. I suppose what we need to kind of look at is, if we look at inflation over the last year and a half, if you could go back in time, back a year and a half ago, if you told clients that their buildings were going to cost 10% more, but they would reduce their energy values, would they have taken up on it? I don't know. If you could go back in time now and say, by the way, we can deliver your project what you're paying now, we give you the energy benefits, they'd have probably burnt your hand off. So, I think, that's going to be the biggest challenge, but I think, it's a challenge that has to be overcome. It's not a case of, should we do it? We need to do it now.
That's interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
We are also seeing that in Kier. We found a lot of really great innovative solutions, but they do cost slightly more to the business, and it's trying to overcome getting the initial cost over the payback period. and trying to get that across to clients and to their investors.
Richard,
Yeah,
there's two things.
I'm going to pick up a little bit on that point around, because it's a question that comes up a lot, which is, the financial side of this: who pays, where are the benefits, where does that come back to? But I wanted to pick up a little bit, maybe with you, Elizabeth, just on. I mean, there's the net zero standard that you've worked on, but I suppose, how will this standard help you achieve these goals? I mean, how does that help you as a business drive that forward? I guess for you, but also for your clients.
Well, really, the guide provides our customers with some direction, and the certification process. There's an end goal with the standard, because it's fully certified. It's also providing our design teams with a structured process with key milestones for reporting, which is really important. I think people talk about legislation, and really people won't only do what they have to do as a bare minimum. So we need to remember that there is a climate emergency, and each project really is providing us with an opportunity to respond to the climate emergency. So the standard provides everyone with the tools. Linking back to what Lisa was saying, with the collaboration, it's all really down to the supply chain. All the main contractors tend to use similar supply chain partners. So by developing the supply chain and looking at new materials, more sustainable materials, and supporting those supply chain businesses, that's where we can make a real difference. There's always new materials being developed. There's like the Kenotech K-brick, which is not a fired brick, so it's far less carbon intensive. There's Indie Nature, who are a startup business who are getting their insulation materials certified at the moment. So it's looking at what's available and supporting these new businesses will drive the construction industry to where it needs to be.
Okay, no, that's interesting. And there's lots of questions coming in. You can also, there's a little thumbs up signal there, which means that if those are particular ones that you're interested in, do add your thumbs up to those, and then I can also then run through the questions as efficiently as we can. I'm going to come to those in just a second. I just wanted to pick up on that interesting point, though, in terms of the whole of the supply chain. And Lisa, Peter, who it would be interesting just to get your perspective, I think, on is everybody aligned, the whole way through the supply chain, the value chain? Do you think everybody is looking to achieve the goals as well? I mean, do you find that's throughout everybody who you're dealing with, I guess, all the way from your clients, the ultimate occupiers, and all the way through the supply chain?
If I just come in there, Lisa, I think we're starting to see traction in it, Richard, throughout the full supply chain. Clients, obviously, particularly public sector clients, they have their own carbon strategies and carbon goals and objectives, and we're seeing more and more interest in the actual net zero delivery from the top down. I think as you go down through the supply chain, I think the supply chain is still catching up in certain areas, albeit you are seeing a lot more of the supply chain now coming on board, particularly your product manufacturers, where they're now providing product-specific EPDs to prove their environmental credibility and that sort of thing. So I think it's a moving target at the minute, Richard, but there's definitely traction within the industry, and it's an improving circumstance as we move forward.
Great,
Yeah.
really interesting. What's your kind of view on that one, Lisa?
Yeah, I think the same as Peter, really. But yeah, we are seeing a lot of clients with a different variation of their targets, and some are really, really ambitious with 2030 targets, like Scapes 2028. And yeah, I think for the most part, people do have targets and they really want to achieve them. But the difference is that with the guide, it actually helps them to achieve those targets, rather than just wanting to have a net zero target. you can actually have tangible evidence on how to achieve it, a step-by-step process.
Okay, great. I saw there was a question as well. Can this presentation and associated information be emailed for colleagues who cannot make it this morning? Yes, absolutely. We can find a way to do this. Also for them, if they're not able to attend, we'll make this available on demand, and that should be available probably by, may even be this afternoon, but certainly by tomorrow morning. So we'll also send a link round to everybody so that you can access that as well. So thank you for that. I just wanted to, and I'll come to your questions in a second, but I just wanted to pick up, I suppose, when we're looking at this, a lot of this is focused heavily on new build, obviously, but how does this tackle as well? Obviously, 80% of the buildings that are going to be there in 2050 are already built. So how does it tackle that? I don't know if you want to pick up first of all on that, Chris.
Yeah, of course. So the first thing to say is that the net zero public building standard that we're all trying to work towards and support here has been written with a view to delivering new build construction and substantial retrofit refurbishment projects. So it's a guide that's designed to deal with whole building performance assessment, whether it is a whole new building or a whole refurbishment. And the Scottish Government are working on similar proposals for small refurbishments at the moment as well for retrofit. So there will be similar guidance for smaller things, but as it stands, that guidance is designed for whole building refurbishment as well as new build. We absolutely want to be delivering that. It's part of what we've written the guide for. So 100% both. And as you say, investing in existing buildings is a substantially more carbon efficient thing to do.
And in general, Lisa, Peter, Elizabeth, are you beginning to see more demand, particularly for retrofit rather than either, I suppose, demolish and rebuild or even new construction?
We are. We've already had a few projects through SCAPE which are to the InnerFit standard. So that's similar to Passive House. It's Passive House for retrofit. So a lot of our customers are looking at their existing assets and looking to upgrade them, which is fabulous for us because the embodied carbon of existing buildings is, if we're reusing the existing building, it'll lower the embodied carbon because we're using the structure, the foundations that are generally there, and that's where the majority, I think up to 60% of the embodied carbon within buildings is within the structure. So reusing what we have there is what we want to do. We also talk about buildings being the material banks of the future. So on our new buildings, we're looking at designing for deconstruction or future, to start with, future flexibility. Can the building be used for something else? And then designing for deconstruction so that those materials can be reused in the future as well.
Super, that's really interesting. We're getting a huge number of questions, so I'm going to try and dig into as many of these as we can, and then I'll also pick up on some of the other themes. But let's start with these ones. So, how have you found that your clients justify direct award to their internal governance? How do you get around the idea that it's not competitive tender? And are procurement teams okay with this? That's open to anybody. I guess that may be a question more for you, Chris, than the others, but feel free to pick on that.
I'll start, but as colleagues in the construction teams have mentioned already, lots of clients in Scotland and the UK use SCAPE already. We have 1,300 public sector organisations in the UK use SCAPE's frameworks, and colleagues working for the Scottish construction businesses will echo that in a minute. But SCAPE's procurement is competitive. It's undertaken under the public contract rules in both the UK and Scotland specifically. All of our tenders are done in a fully competitive way. The direct award model is absolutely critical for the climate emergency, and here's why. 70% carbon reduction potential in projects if you start at the beginning looking at how you're going to build the building. That falls to 45% if you design the building and then talk to a contractor, because you can't access the products and the solutions on the market until you engage with a contractor. Do not expect a design team working for a consultancy to know the construction market because they don't buy the materials. So at Scape, we go to market and we commercially tender, and we get huge economies of scale around the management fees for construction, the principal contractors, overheads and fees. But 90%-ish of each project is tendered competitively every time through that direct award model by the contractors. And that tendering process by the contractors allows them to partner and work competitively with innovative suppliers who make low carbon materials. Like I say, if you don't have an early contractor involvement conversation on your project, you're potentially giving away 30% of the carbon reduction opportunity. And that's why direct award matters. That's why it's important. But the thousands of public sector clients trust the model. We've been doing it for 15 years. We're owned by local government. We do things by local government rules.
Okay, super. And thanks for this one, Sandy, as well. Does anyone happen to know if the new standard is expected only to apply to conventional office civic buildings, or is it expected that it will apply to operation buildings such as workshops, depots, plant-centric compounds, those kinds of things? So just interesting in terms of the sectors, whether it applies across all of these sectors.
Peter, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, in essence, just now the standard applies to buildings in the public sector estate, but that's not to say that the principles of that couldn't apply within other sectors that aren't covered under that. I think at the end of the day, we all have this to do, or we all have to do or be socially responsible, and our hope is that the standard, it filters out across the private sector as well, so that more people start to get on board with this drive towards net zero.
Peter, the net zero public building standard, is it 11 categories of building that they've got energy specific targets for? So there's a range, isn't there? Yeah,
there's a range of buildings, and I think you're right, Chris. I think it is 11, and they've all got set values for energy use, but depending on the building type.
Okay, perfect.
There's also the UK standard that's being developed,
yep.
Which will cover a range of different building sectors. But talking about the procurement process in the last question, it might be worth mentioning the research project that we carried out with Scape, which asked a question: what would happen if we rethought the procurement and design process, actually putting carbon before CapEx? So that took an existing school project. It was an education project, a primary school, and by rethinking the procurement process and making all decisions based on carbon before CapEx, just to see what the outcome would be, we got some really amazing results, like a 67% reduction in whole life carbon, a 72% reduction in upfront embodied carbon, a 52% reduction in annual energy consumption, a 39% reduction in forest consumption. The increase in capital cost was 3.7% increase, which was actually 4.7% including the UK offset. But interestingly, the CapEx payback period was 7 years. And over the life cycle of the project, the building, there was 150k saving. So it does pay to put carbon before CapEx.
Okay, interesting. A quick question as well from Alistair, and thank you for all those questions coming in. Is there a project in Scotland where we'll be seeing this process used soon? Anybody?
I was going to say, I think all three contractors are working on them at the minute. pick one, guys.
We are. It's coming out within the tenders as well. There's people asking for the Net Zero Public Sector Building Standard certification. So it is new. It's still new. It's a new process, but it is coming out into our customers' requirements.
Yeah, and we are currently working through 3 projects that are potentially looking to use it at the minute, and they're in pre-construction phase.
Richard, it's worth saying the framework was awarded in October last year, so naturally a lot of the projects that are going down this route are still in pre-construction because you can only access the framework from October onwards. So those projects are getting to the stage where they're being designed now.
Okay, great. I'm going to read out a few just because there's a lot, and then we can pick up some of those points as a kind of round, if we like. So just try to remember these as we go along, which is the feasibility support aspect was mentioned as free in the presentation. What expectations would Scape have from prospective clients to do that feasibility work? E.g., would it be some indication of capital, operational budgetary commitment, some preliminary in-house work, etc.? So that's one question that's come in. How do you ensure the effective collaboration within the procurement model? Are there any approaches enacted to make sure this works? How does the lifecycle contract protect clients from underperformance of the building after completion? An interesting one, I think, there as well. And this one, having recently worked on public sector projects using passive house design in Scotland, would the approach also be considered at an early design stage? There's more coming in, but maybe just pick up any of those that anybody wants to.
Shall I do just briefly on the Scape feasibility process? The scope of the work that's done in that, it's a viability assessment to support the client in establishing how they're going to deliver their projects, risk, program, cost. The scope of services that are obtained through that process are really well documented in the framework. So if clients are interested in looking at it, get in touch with us and we'll provide you with the framework handbook that describes exactly what you're supposed to get in the feasibility stage. But in terms of life cycle, a proper engagement of what your in-use objectives are for the building is absolutely critical in that discussion. About whole life carbon and cost will be part of that discussion.
If I just pick up on the one on Passive House, Richard, there, but with any of these strategies, it's important that they are brought in from the start, as Chris and Elizabeth alluded to earlier on. I think the net zero public sector building standard places a big emphasis on this, and the first objective, which is that deals with place, and it's the inclusive net zero economy outcomes, that's dealt with at the initial REBA 0, REBA 1 stage, and it's part of the first initial application. So setting your targets, setting your carbon strategy, looking at the methods that you're going to use to achieve that, they're all key in that early stages. The later you bring it in, the less chance you've got of being able to complete and comply with every aspect that you're trying to achieve.
Okay, great. There's a couple of ones that have come in as well on cost. An interesting one here is that, are there any routes that actually make development cheaper? And a second one, is there a sense of cost coverages in percentage terms over and above traditional costs? So that's interesting, because that discussion around cost and payback, huge discussions at the moment in terms of the investment side in capital market timing, in terms of valuations. Will you be able to get a payback for the investments that you make? So it might be also interesting to pick up that point, but maybe also just discuss that kind of cost side of it as well.
We are working with our design teams and industry experts such as IES. We are finding that there are more cost-effective solutions that are actually result in cost savings. I can give you one example. We worked on Naval Community Campus, which is a LEAP-funded project, and the design team changed the domestic hot water central system to point-of-use water heaters, and that resulted in a reduction in the operational energy, a reduction in the carbon, but there was also a capital saving there as well. So there are cheaper options that are better for the environment and reduce carbon. There's other ones that if you're investing in the fabric, there is going to be a cost, but by enhancing the fabric, then you are reducing the operational energy. So everything's about balance.
Yeah, that rounded view of value is so important here, Richard, that the discussion about outcomes and the discussion about the quality of the environment you're creating, this all comes together. You don't have to talk about carbon as if it's an isolated issue. And I actually think we all need to reflect hard on what we've been doing as an industry for a long time, because we've been making capital cost an obsession for a very long time, with one exception, which is building safety and the safety, the sanctity of life. That aside, we're obsessed to the detriment of everything else. And we all need to change that behaviour really quickly, because it is costing us. And that capital cost obsession is limiting the scope for really innovative change. But it's also, and we're not talking about huge uplifts. Elizabeth gave those research evidence stats that this doesn't cost more in the long run, but by short-circuiting investment in the supply chains, by undercutting the use of innovative materials, you're not giving Scottish supply chain businesses, UK supply chain businesses, the fighting chance, the revenue into their businesses to innovate. So that investment is not just an investment in a high-quality building, it's an investment in local business. It's an investment in local economy. It's absolutely critical. We need to talk about the value of the pound and where it ends up, not just the CapEx cost up front.
There's another really important subject that tends to go in the back burner, but is really, really important for our buildings and the built environment, is building maintenance. As we are building tighter to passive house standards, the importance of maintenance is crucial, because you're not getting that air movement within the building. And if you're building to passive house standard, then the ventilation systems and maintaining those ventilation systems is essential. And if you're not changing filters, then you're actually increasing the energy consumption, because the fans are having to work harder, and not you're creating moisture issues. You're actually creating sick buildings if you don't maintain passive house standard buildings to the requirements. So there is going to be some issues in the future if people don't maintain the buildings to the necessary standards.
I think, Elizabeth, following on from that, it's that whole quality piece, quality in design, quality in construction, and quality in maintenance. We need to get better at quality to make this happen.
One final point on this, Richard. Sorry, Lisa. The one thing that this approach, thinking early about what you do differently and focusing on outcomes, is it tends towards a more collaborative process that leads into solutions and ways of construction that cut carbon. And a number of those techniques lead you into modern methods of construction and more efficient methods. And one of the things that we've seen the potential for is that the time in the later stages of a project gets saved substantially by some of those methods. So we will see, I think, as some of the manufacturing-led approaches that are emerging become more prevalent, we will see that while we invest more time up front in quality of design and in consideration of some of the issues, we'll actually see savings in delivery, because we'll be more consistent in our ways of working. And that's a hidden saving that will come through this way of working in the future, which isn't being talked about enough yet.
Okay, good. Lisa, did you want to pick that up?
Just that sustainability, the main point of sustainability is that it is financially sustainable as well. It's not sustainable if it costs you more in the long run. So I think that mindset is a really important one to hold on top of not focusing on capital cost as much too.
I've got a great couple of questions come in as well on the sort of innovation side, one of which is, do you support operational digital twins at the post-occupancy and operational project stages? But also another one, which is, what tools or other software are deployed to assess both embodied carbon targets and budgets for whole life or life cycle costs for maintenance? And that picks up that point you mentioned there as well, Elizabeth. So I don't know if anybody wants to pick up those costs. What I'll do as well is I'll make sure that all of these questions are sent to everybody, because there's a huge number of them. So if we don't get a chance to address them fully in this session, then I'll make sure that the speakers can also come back to you directly with those.
If I can just pick up the digital twin aspect, that's part of what we do within the life cycle model. The digital twin is a key aspect, because in the post-occupancy phase, as we are looking at the building, fine-tuning the building, testing the building, making sure that it works properly, we need to have that digital twin to make that happen. So we have a digital toolkit within the Scape life cycle framework, which we've been working on, and that will all come together to help us build that digital twin and make sure that we can monitor the buildings once we've actually delivered them.
Yeah.
And just a quick one here as well, which is, does the retrofit application of this work for housing? That's either a yes or a no, I would guess. But Chris, does it work for housing?
I would say in principle, yes. I would ask my contractor colleagues to answer that question individually, because their business models and their approaches regionally, it depends whether they want to do housing work and whether their teams are set up for it. So I'd probably put it to you guys in terms of whether you want to do that work in Scotland and in the regions at the moment. It
definitely works for housing. Morgan Sindall we Morgan Sindall Construction don't do housing. We've got a sister company called Level that do housing. They're doing a lot of passive house buildings, and they utilise our Morgan Sindall Group carbon calculator tool called Carbonica, which really provides, it's a really unique tool. It's been developed by contractors, by ourselves, and it covers the whole life cycle of the building. So it works out the embodied carbon at each stage of construction over the life cycle and the whole life carbon. So it provides design recommendations as well to focus on where there is a high embodied carbon, and provides recommendations to the design team to reduce that. Things like the embodied carbon is very high in foundations and concrete. So looking at low carbon alternatives, the structural steel, we'd all love to build timber frame buildings to reduce the embodied carbon, but there's the insurance aspect of that as well with timber. So Carbonica is a really strong tool for providing our design teams with recommendations, and it's different. It's been third party validated by Arup, and they said it's the most comprehensive tool in the market because it is capturing the construction energy consumption, water consumption, the transportation of materials, so it gives a full picture. But that tool is really helping to influence the designs as well and reduce carbon. So one project we've been working on recently, we entered the benchmarking data into the tool. It came out with a result of just over 1,000 kilograms of CO2 per square metre. And by making alternative selections, working with the supply chain, we've managed to reduce that down. And even we used that in the circular twin project as well, Chris, and that reduced embodied carbon down to less than 500 kilograms.
I just flag up one really important observation alongside Elizabeth's point, which is during the design process as an industry, we're all used to costing the designs. Clients have got in their heads, I don't want a 40-foot overhang because it will cost me more. We need to start having that exact same philosophy around carbon accounting during design. If we don't, then the consequences of our design decisions are not thought through. So whichever contractor you work with, and I know Kieran and McLaughlin's also use their own different tools, but bottom line, if you don't have that thread of carbon management in your project from the beginning, you're not going to be able to manage carbon. It's as simple as that, and it's a really basic tenet. Someone in the project team needs to be taking responsibility for carbon, and you need to have a tool that's providing you the measurement and estimation of carbon as you go. I know that sounds really basic, but if you don't measure it, you can't manage it.
No, that's good. A quick question here is, what work's being done to bang the drum with elected politicians, especially councillors, on this and the specifics such as carbon before capex, as councils are still often making decisions on capital with limited OPEX, let alone carbon considerations. And I think that's also that kind of wider point of knowledge sharing, I think, to a certain extent, is how much of this is going to actually help share some of that expertise, insights, knowledge across the whole sector, including the public sector and the commercial sector.
If you look at funding streams, such as the LEAP funding for educational projects, they are looking at the phase 3 of LEAP funding at the moment, and they are looking to bring embodied carbon targets into that. So as more funding bodies start to consider like the life cycle carbon, that's going to drive it, and it will come into local government legislation. It is coming. We just need to be
politically, Richard. A lot of these local politicians have declared a climate emergency and set a deadline for when their place is going to be net zero, and that's coming back now. And they're starting to ask the questions: how are we doing? How quickly are we going to do this? What are we doing to get there? And the conversation is getting easier by the minute because citizens are asking their politicians, "What are you doing?" So it's accelerating in that sense.
Okay, great. I know we've reached officially our time, but I'm just going to extend just for 5 minutes, if everybody's comfortable with that, just to deal with a couple of these. Very interesting one, which I assume may be coming from somebody within the supply chain, which is on the discussion of costs. Have there been any commitments from the contractors on the framework to reduce their profits and to squeeze the supply chain less in order to also contribute to improving the industry, as well as asking us to pay more? But I think that's an interesting point, generally picking up that collaboration side, is, are there ways in which people can work together? The collaboration maybe does have that beneficial aspect of being able to take some friction out of the whole process and maybe reduce costs and help drive it forward.
Yeah, I mean, that's... Oh, sorry, Elizabeth.
No, it's on you go, Peter.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say the framework allows for that to happen. Part of the framework, and it's a big part of the framework, is early contractor involvement and early supply chain engagement, getting the specialist supply chain on at the very early stages so that we can work through the costs with them, work through the design with them, come up with the best solution for the project as well, and so that they aren't being squeezed as they feel at the end of the project. So it is very open, it is very collaborative, and it's collaborative for all parties.
I was just going to say that a lot of the main contractors are on the supply chain sustainability school together. So we are working with the supply chain. They have the opportunity to use the school's resources. They're free resources. You just go on and register online, and you can create learning pathways as well to upskill and learn more about sustainability and net zero carbon. So that resource is available to everyone, and that's a collaboration with many industry partners.
Okay, great. And I think the final one that I've seen is working with public sector clients. Their money comes out of different pots, so increased capital costs can be an issue, and it's not always able to be considered in the round against savings in accounting terms. How can this be managed? I don't know whether that's something that that you guys have come across as an issue.
Yeah, it's nice to be talking about this with a Scottish focus, because I come from an education commissioning background some time ago in the public sector, and in England particularly, capex and opex for schools is a completely, the two things never talk, which is a disaster for low carbon engineering. Slightly different in Scotland, where LEAP funding makes a connection between the two. But this problem exists, Richard. It exists in public sector and private sector organisations. Is how do I bring that business case together? We're just trying to provide some tools in this process that allow that to happen in the contract, so there's a bit more confidence for investors that they can put their money where their mouth is and get it back, which is one mechanism. I think we've got to encourage investors. We've got to be willing to consider investment on that basis. The energy bill is always going to be there. It's a good place to go in terms of investment return, because you have to turn the lights on. But it is not an easy one to reconcile, and public sector budgets, doesn't matter when you ask the question, they're always stretched. So this will always be challenging.
I also think that's a big focus from the standard now as well, where it is asking if the only reason is that it's a financial issue, it then focuses that, and you have to question it more, because the standard now says that's not an excuse to not do it if it's just a financial reason for stopping it. So once that does become mandatory, that pressure will ease.
Yeah. Well,
it's great that LEAP funding is focusing on the maintenance. You have to maintain the building to achieve the LEAP funding. You have to achieve the operational energy targets, and you have to carry out post-occupancy evaluation. And creating the digital twins is providing the opportunity to tailor the buildings. And like I always talk about buildings being similar to instruments. Like you have to be taught how to use the instrument, and it has to be fine-tuned, and buildings are exactly the same.
No, I think that's great. And I suppose just as a final point, if people want to be involved in it, how do they get involved in it? So for those that, there may be people attending who haven't had experience of this. So how do they get involved?
The quickest way, Peter, Richard, is probably download the guide, back cover. You've got contacts for all four organisations supporting this call. email addresses and phone numbers if you start there, and we'll support you however you need help.
Thanks very much for joining us, everybody.